So welcome everyone in this Traditional Boats and Maritime Traditions seminar, the first one of 2023. Today we are very happy to have with us Alberto Hoces-García, who is going to present to us the topic that he has been working on for a few years now, shipwright in history, trade and heritage. He just completed his PhD at the University of Murcia, and he's also the chair of Naval History and Heritage there. We are very excited to have you here. Thank you very much for your time, and we are very looking forward to hear your talk.
Thank you very much, Katerina, for the invitation, for this presentation and for the invitation to this seminar. Just one thing, I wish I could be the chair, but right now I'm just a researcher within it. There is more people working in the chair. That said, I've been reading about the other seminar, the other conferences presented at this seminar, and I think the one I'm gonna speak about today is a bit more wide and less deep than the others, which I think is also interesting more for in between dissemination and research purposes, because part of this conference, it's part of other projects which are more related to research, but part of it are more related to dissemination, which will help in the end the aim of these seminars. That said, as I was talking with Katerina just before starting, the contents of this conference are also written in a chapter of the book you are seeing right now, Down by the Water, published by the colleagues of Katerina. So in case you want to get into more details or data or even the bibliography, I can also send it to you. You might find the chapter I conducted here with two of my colleagues. That said, well, let's give it a little introduction about what shipwright is and why is it important to us and why this trade and history words are that important in this presentation. The first, as we could say about the shipwrights, is that the craft is the work and with ships is as old as the sailing itself. Since the very beginning, even if it were rivers or sea, there was a need of cross or to use the water because it's been easier until the railway. It's been easier to move society and goods and merchants and people across water. So the first thing we can say about shipwrights is the people that made these vehicles possible to other people to cross and to use the waterways. Therefore, the skills of these people, they were really necessary, or very estimated, very valued from the earliest of times. And that's something I just think about when we were just chatting before the presentation. I was a bit shocked that in some words it was that the people felt that the crafting was not really valued by society, because from our point of view and from a historical point of view, it had been always a really estimated and really valued craft because of its importance in society. That said, well, shipwrights have also worked with different kind of materials and work nowadays with different kind of materials. We may relate it quickly to food because it's the one more expanded and widely used, but at the beginning especially, but also nowadays in some Arctic areas, skin has been used, also plants, fiber as the papyrus or the totora, for example, or glass fiber nowadays. The shipwright and the glass fiber is a really delicate issue. The craft itself has complied the activity of from the planting the tree until polishing the deck, which is said here, because a shipwright had to do all this task. They have to know this, or they have to know which kind of wood they are using, but it's not only buying this wood, but they also used to, I don't know if nowadays they still do, but still in Spain it's really weird to find some shipwrights that do that. They used to guide the woods to have the shapes they wanted for the ships, for example. They used to order how they have to be transported, so then also the water used could help in the managing of this wood, etc. And of course, they have to be good sailors, because otherwise they didn't know how to manipulate goods, the boats, how to make them good. Well, this is a free introduction, so of course we can say that it has been a family craft traditionally. It has been transferred orally from fathers to sons or to neighbors, or just in between the wide conception of family. through mostly the guild that we will deepen a little bit later with this typical medieval forming of learning from the apprentice to the journeyman or officer to the master. We can also say that the craft has used different woods for different uses, well, from oak to pine trees, or also some other tropical woods, independent of if you need roughness, if you need tightness, if you need malleability, etc. With all of this, we can say that it's a craft that compresses really wide knowledge, and it is also similar to other crafts. Like, so for example, the most similar of all of them is Colker, and we have tried and we have tested, that most of the shipwrights nowadays, they also consider themselves Colkers, or even some of them don't consider them shipwrights but Colkers, because it's a really similar craft. That said, let's start a historical approach from the historiographical point of view. And the first thing that we have to say is that there is a few, there is not many academic production about shipwrights as protagonists from a historical point of view. We can say that there are studies about them, most of them comprising other crafts or comprising the building of boats itself. From that point of view, there are studies, but not talking about the craft itself. Let's say we can talk about measures, we can talk the evolution of boats, but only a few studies are focused on the how these people managed and who these people were. Of course, I'm talking here from mostly Spanish language sources, but also English. I cannot get, or we didn't go deep in Greek sources or even other languages, Arabic, for example. We think it would be interesting, but we don't have this knowledge, so we didn't go deep into that. So everything, of course, is susceptible to be amended. What we can say also is like in the recent years, local studies are starting to be more common. As I just said, it's more related to Spanish language. So we can cite some of Spain, Chile, Mexico, Uruguay, or Argentina that are starting to raise the issue of the loss of the craft, because it is true that in some of these countries it's still more alive than in Europe, but in some of them it's also being lost. So of course it attracts academic attention. That's it. Let's give it a first approach of where the shipwright, as we know, evidence were founded. The first we can say is in Tunisia and in Egypt. Most of the evidences are related to the river, but although in Tunisia is more related to sea, but to the river boats of Egypt. I guess the first conference of this seminar was the second seminar. Yeah, I don't remember exactly which Caterina, but there's some of the conference that it was related to that, so I'm not going to deep into it. But there is a thing we can say, and we should mark about the Egyptian tradition of shipwriting, and it's the toolbox for saying it. So the tools used in Egypt, they didn't change much until nowadays, with the only exception of the adze, the brush. The rest of the tools, let's say rules, the square, the axes, some of them, the saws, brushes, reels, etc. This toolbox, as a conception, not the box itself, it was the same that it was used later on in Greece and Rome, in the Mediterranean itself, and of course it expanded with the globalization of the European culture and countries. It's not until the Industrial Revolution and in the fiber cycle that other kind of tools were introduced, but the main toolbox is still being used the same. So for that we have to refer to this part of the Mediterranean. I'm not really sure about if the Greek or the Cyprus evidences also are as old as Phoenician or Egypt, because as I said before, we cannot get deep into this language studies. But what we can say is that being the tools the same, we can assume that the craft didn't change so much, although the methods of construction did. One of the main changes with the fall of the Occidental Roman Empire is that the communications were a bit harder with the introduction of non-Romantic languages as a common lexicon in the Mediterranean. But it is really interesting, and I'm going to say that Phoenix now, that during the early medieval ages, certain jargon composed of French, Spanish, Italian, and other languages, which sounds broken, in which only the infinitive of the verb is used for all tenses and modes of conjugation, and which is used by all sailors and also Mediterranean merchants on all coasts of the Levant. Well, this lexicon that we are talking about in the early medieval ages evolved until lingua franca in the late medieval and the early modern ages, which major expression is the galley, because all the parts of it and of its construction are more or less the same nouns in everywhere in the Mediterranean. We have also, under the chair of Maritime and Naval History, published a dictionary about this lingua franca. You can find this as Fontevilla in 2011. And yeah, as Fanny said, this is completely mentioned of Romantic and Arabic vocabulary and lexicon. Well, you can see here the Stele of Publius Longidenus. I think you also may know about this. It's one of the oldest images that we can find about a shipwright working actually in a ship. Regarding the trade itself, we can say it's established or organized under the naviculari, the ship owners. During the Roman times, there were some kind of contracts that can lead us to say that it was established as a trade, recognized as a trade. But it is more during the early medieval ages and the modern ages that the guilds dedicated all their works and all their efforts to make it visible and available to society that shipwright was a craft itself. These guilds, the brotherhoods, had also religious, funeral, and mutual aid purpose, and of course they work at a corporate level. This corporation level led to some endogamy, but it also helped the movement of master shipwrights because they could certify their knowledge. That is important because it also originated some juridical problems on causes. I don't know if causes is to say there is a word in English, causa in Spanish. Yeah, some trials is the word I was looking for, that could lead us to some information, and that is important because as the guilds were a closed space, a closed scenario, the knowledge was always transferred orally. So these trials lead us to some of the knowledge they could have. It is important also the establishment of the craft through the guilds, because these guilds were also a way of political participation, of relevance into society. It is not that some of good men, some gentlemen were chosen to rule the guild, although they were chosen, they had almost universal power over the guild, but they also had to respond to usually to the cities or to the kingdoms in which they were. This was one of the first points that the rulers used to get into the craft and to manage it, although it will not be until the end of the modern age that it's an effect. But the function of the overseer, or veedores in Spanish, that figure is the one that starts to get them regulated, but let's say it's also some state actors. The guilds are also important because they create status to perform their craft, that lead us to know how this craft was taught. As I would say, it was oral, but we know exactly how it was. In the medieval ages, as the rest of the crafts, there were some apprentices. They started with an officer, and they started between an age of 12 and 14, and then they were working usually around 3 years, and then they could become a second officer or an officer and work after an exam on their own, and then after they could apply for a mastership to be the master and establish all completely on their own and then have their own apprentices. Of course, it was all handled by the gentlemen that ruled this guild. This is the situation until the modern age, which, as you all know, acknowledge the first globalization. What happens with the first globalization? Well, it expands within this craft, it expands this craft to other continents. Really brief note here about the systems as they were being used. As I said, I'm not going to deep into this because I think there is enough knowledge in the audience about even way more than we have about the construction itself. But let's just say that the clinker and the caravel construction is from top to top or overlapping the planks of the hull. They were the main two European and Mediterranean ways of building the ships, and they were the one exported into first America and then Africa and Asia. But it is important to say here that it was not only an exportation, but also an importation of techniques. As I started saying, this work of with skills relates us to one of the, I think, most known importation of to the European craftsmanship, and is, for example, the canoes or the kayaks. I think they are really known, and these are techniques that were imported in Europe. That said, at the first expansion, the rulers that they have already entered into the guilds with these overseers started to rule over the guilds. And one of the first examples that we can find is the Ordenanzas Generales, the general ordinances that they were published in Castilla and Spain in 1607, detailing all the measures and the sizes of the ships. The kings were interested in taxes, of course, but they were also interested in the safety of the trade of goods and people within America. This is important not only for the ships, because also it establishes who can work and in which boats can work. As I was saying, not only these methods from America or Asia are imported to Europe and then re-globalized, but also the goods, since the trade between other continents became common. We can also see how tropical goods are imported and are basic in nowadays shipwright all across Europe and the Mediterranean, for example. With all of this in mind, we come to the 17th and 18th century, and we are approaching more the temporal focus of this seminar. And we can say that during the 17 and 18, the work, the craft itself started to specialize a lot, because these pre-industrial hubs that the shipwrights were, the shipyards, were tend to use more specialized workers. Together with the shipwrights, there are the caulkers, of course, but there are also the people in charge of making the barrels, the people in charge of making the iron works, the people in charge of making the sails, etc., etc., etc. These works that were conducted before by one or two people started to be conducted by hundreds of people, so they had masters in each of these crafts. That leads, of course, to a specialization in shipwright. The guilds, of course, here start to be really courageous against each other. In the 17th century, for example, in our research, we found tons and tons of trials in Barcelona, for example, of one kind of carpenters, in this case, both carpenters, shipwrights, fighting against other, even to a specialization of the city of 7 different kinds of carpenters, one dedicated to statues, one dedicated to ships, one dedicated to coastal constructions, one dedicated to houses, and even kind of carpenters that were only dedicated to the launch of the ship, and they were not shipwrights. Until that is the point of the specialization and the relevance of the guilds. With that, in the 18th century, well, we all know that is between the 18th and the 19th century, the age of the golden age of sailing. Within this golden age of sailing, it also becomes great increasing in the navies of the European states, the European metropolis, that of course expanded the legislation and overlapped the guilds. Why? Because they needed to incorporate the guilds and the shipwrights to their own systems. First, it starts the euro, the law only, and then in the second half, in the last quarter of the 18th century, that starts to be a factual thing. The states, so as for example, Denmark, Norway, started to recruit, asking for the work in exchange of for money, for a salary, to these shipwrights, to including them into the navy systems. But other states, as Spain or France, directly they registered that in some kind of forced labor called the Maritime registration systems. In France, it's called the Système des Classes. In Spanish, it's called the Matrícula de Mar, like seafarers registration. Within these systems, they incorporated this them into the branches of the state. And why is this important? Because with the increasing of the size of vessels and the number of people used in the shipyards, became also the development of the scientific method, the hydrodynamics, the artillery, and the theory of shipbuilding, which started already in the 17th century, become implanted in the 18th century. And here we can see, for example, how France established the School of Naval Architecture in 1765. It is important that the scripture architecture because it's not shipbuilding. Why it's not? Because they were already differentiating these two crafts. This is one of the major points in the history of the craft because it's starting to differentiate what we call here elaboration versus production. Because the work at the shipwrights needed to be more, it's not in line because that doesn't come until 4, but it needs to be more organized and more focused in the efficiency than in the craftsmanship. A few years later, for example, in Spain, it's also created the Corps of Engineers of the Navy, which are also not called shipwrights, but engineers. From this point, we have two major traditions, two dissociated traditions. One related to the military that will adapt eventually to the merchant ship and eventually to the civil ones related, and it's called as naval engineering. And one first related to the merchant and the civilian, and then restricted to fishers mostly and leisure boats, which is called shipwright. These different ways of shipbuilding, they have also different way of transfer the knowledge. As we said, the shipwrights transfer the knowledge mostly oral, with oral tradition, but also with some kind of measures secret to their own. But the naval engineers transfer all this knowledge through publications. Making it public makes it easier to evolve, and that becomes the two different traditions. This technological surveillance that was established made it impossible for the shipwrights to fight against the industrial or pre-industrial ways of construction. Of course, this launches in the second half of the 18th century, in the last quarter, and it quickly becomes imported into the Industrial Revolution in the early 19th century. Of course, the money and the capitals are more focused into the naval engineers' way of building because it's cheaper and bigger boats, which is one of the first of the nails in the coffin of the craft, as we can say. Although it's not the last one, because as the Industrial Revolution started, the globalization, the second globalization, we could say, started as well. Merchant trade was cheaper, so then there were also more chances of building bigger wooden boats. We can say the clippers, for example, was the last example of this. And as early as the 1840s, we have companies established by shipwrights to enable them trying to compete with the companies led by naval engineers with capital behind them or with the navies behind them. We all know that the second one prevailed. This is what we call elaboration versus production, which started actually in the mid-19th century. As we said before, it's not until this point that the tools start to change a little bit, but the main tools are the same. In this point, we can also add the new machinery for sewing and squaring the wood, and some for using off the steam. The rest of the craftsmanship for a shipwright is the same. We cannot say the same for naval engineer because naval engineer starts to work with metal, especially, so the craft changes. A lot. I don't want to get too long with it, so I'm going to go directly into the example of Spain and Latin America because it's the ones that we studied more. This Industrial Revolution, as we said, is not the end of the craftsmanship. But it also helps to rise it a little bit because, population is increasing, commerce is increasing, so more shipwrights are needed too. That changes also with the introduction of steam and also with diesel and of other kind of motors, other kind of motors. And in the case of Spain, for example, we can say that the shipwrights face a little bit of problematic times between the 1900s and the 1930s. But afterwards, and this is kind of paradoxical, but with the implementation of the dictatorship in 1939 in Spain, it becomes a moment of self-economic industry. And then Franco empowered the shipwrights. Why? They empowered the shipwrights because Spain needed food, Spain needed fish, so they needed to build the boats for the fish. This is different from other countries. For example, during the 30s until the 70s in Spain, the shipwrights had access to the earliest industrialization of shipyards. So that's why, for example, in the north of Spain, we can still find several shipwrights, but in the rest we cannot because they were not industrialized during this time. But at the same time, in Mexico, there were no wooden boats made anymore because they were not protected by the state. Either way, in the 80s, it's in Spain. In the 80s, it's in other countries, it's a little bit different. Spain applies for becoming a member of the European Union, and I think this is widely known about here, about the audience. The European Union encourages the finish of wooden boats. In terms of efficiency, I think it's one of the things they say. The cessation of subsidized industries on fishing boats is one of the main targets of the boats and boat building and modern cultural heritage, and that's it's one of the main problems with incorporation to the European Union to a lot of countries that they still have shipwright of one of the crux. As we say, the dates and the techniques issue changes in the region. For example, we can see how in Chile, especially in southern Chile, shipwright is still a job in, we can say relatively good condition, because a lot of fishers still use, a lot of industrialized fishers still use wooden ships. So the craft is practically alive. It's not affected by all these processes we've been talking about. But on the other hand, in Europe, mostly Europe, there is a major issue during mostly the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and it's the introduction of fiberglass. We cannot just blame the fiberglass as the only problem for the shipwrights, but we identified it as being the main problem because all the changes that we said before happened through decades or even centuries, whereas the fiberglass happens in just one decade. So in most of the cases, the crafters did not have the money, did not have the knowledge, did not have the tools to adapt to it. And also it requires way lesser hands to work in it. So we identified that as a main problem for the ship, although it's not the only one. Of course, socio-economical situations are to be considered into this problem. With that, I think I more or less used the half an hour that I was given to speak. Sorry if I went a little bit fast in some of the parts, but I wanted to give a little bit of overview of everything so we can discuss, because I think that if there is a discussion, it would be way more interesting of what we could say here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for this, and the article, because I've read it's indeed very interesting, and anyone who wants to look into the bibliography, it's really worthy looking into that. It's very interesting, the continuity that you presented, but also discontinuity in some things. But the way shipwright really developed over time, especially in the Mediterranean and the European world that you were researching, is something really important, and the changes that happen, as you described in the last few decades, the most recent time close to us, it kind of changed rapidly what was happening before, for centuries, with a very nice, almost smooth continuity. And it's all very interesting. And as you said, we're going to have a good discussion. So for anyone who has any questions or comments for Alberto, feel free to open up your cameras and microphones and we can start the discussion. Does anyone have any specific questions or comments?
Yes. Can I speak?
Of course.
Okay. Thank you, Alberto, for this nice presentation, and your view, it's very interesting. What I like to ask, first of all, I like to make a comment that I don't exactly understand what you say about the Greek boat builders. And in the beginning, I think, I'm not sure, but in the Greek boatyards, in the local societies, boat builders were distinctive members of the societies, and they are very they were very proud about them and their job. What I like to ask is a similar question about the Latin America and the the position of the boat builders in the societies, especially in Latin America, and together with the salaries that they had for this job, how attractive is the job nowadays or in the recent past? And the same question for Spain as well. How attractive is nowadays or 2 years ago, a few decades ago, to work in the boatyards and to see for a young person to see his future in this trade?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, when I said about the grid builders, it was more a question that you just answered, because we didn't know if that position that we researched within Egypt and Phoenicia of being important within the communities were also the case in Greece. So thank you because we could not assure it. But we see that it's more or less the same in all societies. We also test that with pre-Hispanic societies in America, for example. They were also considered, even in some cases, as religious leaders, for example. That said, and since I mentioned America, which is also my area of expertise, we cannot say much about from what I just said from pre-Hispanic cultures, because it's not really researched. There are not enough researches about it. There are some taking part now from an anthropological point of view, but we have to consider that they have also, of course, influenced by 500 of conquest. So yeah, we can talk about this kind of affectuation. In some of the cases, they lost privileges, and then I come into the things that we actually know. During the colonial ages, the early modern ages, seafarers did have a good position in society in America. We cannot say the same about the salaries, but it was a good position until the case, for example, that in the Pacific, which is a case of a studio because the tradition is a bit different from Europe. In the Pacific, most of the shipbuilders, for example, they were Black people, and that's interesting because they were considered also as masters in a society where race was really important, legally speaking. Society was ruled by white, and the lesser white you were, the lesser possibilities you have to be someone important in society. Well, that's not the case with shipbuilders, since most of them, they were Black and they were part of the cities. It's also the case in Yucatan, in nowadays Mexico. Most of the shipbuilders were Indian, and they had an important role in their societies, which raises the question when they started to lose that position. Yeah, we cannot say if it's the industrialization of the fiberglass yet, because there are not enough studies. From the actuality, and now I move a little bit southern into the Pacific, I moved to Chile because it's the case I know better personally. They have, we could say, enough salary and enough social perception, but as another manual work. They are not better considered than a worker of construction buildings or something like that. Of course, they are not discarded, but a lot of intellectual elite don't see them as something really important. They don't have that problem within the society. In the case of Spain, it's sad, but there is not really big perspectives for the craft. With all the shipwrights that we talk, they all have the same problem, and it's they lack apprentices. There are several or a few of initiatives to try to overcome this problem. I think the most successful nowadays is Albaola in Pasaya in the Basque Country. They have a school. I think you may know about it. They have a school and they have students from all over the world, and they don't have any problem with the students. But for the rest, they all like this. And for example, in Malaga, they launched courses and even for free, like subsidized from the city hall. And yeah, they had students for 1 or 2 years, but none of them wanted to continue. And the biggest problem of it is, yes, they are not considered by society. In fact, I would say that most of the society in Spain doesn't know what a shipwright is. When I tell my people about what I do, or what I did in the recent years, I have to explain what a shipwright is all the time because they don't know what it is. So that's one of the points. And the second, and I think even most important, is the lack of contracts. Most of the work is to maintain, not to build. So yeah, of course, there is a little bit of work to maintain, to be a culture, let's say, but there are not good perspectives in Spain. They can, nonetheless, emigrate. For example, we know that in Great Britain, the employee rate of shipwrights is nearly to 100%. So yeah, if you can learn, or you could learn the craft in Spain and then emigrate to England or to the United States or to Canada, you could work. But yeah, since even the craft is not known, to know this perspective is really more complicated. I would say more or less in a brief way. That's the state in Spain. I hope I answered the question.
Based on what Costas was asking and what we're discussing before, and you just mentioned Spain, I wonder like what you were saying about the capital and how basically it went with the naval engineering rather than the like more traditional shipwrights and their guilds. And you mentioned like Spain, like basically the society not knowing very much about what a shipwright is, not having a lot of school or apprentices to do that. And I think Greece is suffering from similar things, basically lack of support for that craft to continue and like to develop and have more people coming in and learning the craft so that it continues in the like next decades and centuries. I wonder if you saw something similar like within Europe as well in your research, like for example, like I don't know if you looked at all at Italy, you mentioned France for historical terms. What's the situation, if you know, like now, and if it's any different from, for example, like current Latin America that you mentioned?
Yes, I think so. From what we researched, the status in the Mediterranean, we could say it's similar. Of course, it's not the same because, yeah, Italy, for example, had more access to liberal politics in the 19th century, which, as in the UK, helps more to concentrate some capitals in some parts. Is the case, for example, of what I was saying in the north of Spain. Some shipwrights managed to have their own capital to start little shipyards, and these are the ones that survived, for example. But yeah, we could say in the Mediterranean is more or less the same, except for what we know, except in, of course, and I'm talking about the northern coast of the Mediterranean, except in France. In France, for what we know, the craft is not alive related to fishermen or merchant ships, not that much, but to leisure boats. But it is alive related to leisure boats because there is a deep net of sailing lovers. There is a lot of initiative of the sailing ports, or even the small ones have their own sailing boats to compete against each other. Of course, that creates opportunities for the craftsmen to keep working. But if you keep going to the north, yeah, in Poland they have similar problems that we face in the northern coast of the Mediterranean. And for example, in the Nordic countries, in Norway and such, they have a little bit more opportunities because, again, there is more money interested in leisure boats. Although we may say that in the last years, there is a tendency to talk and to invest into green merchant ship, into zero footprint merchant ship, and there are being built some mostly wooden boats that sail and do not use carbon-based energies. I don't know if you know the Tres Hombres, for example, based in the Netherlands. And yeah, since I said the Netherlands, in the Netherlands, for example, the craft is more or less alive, although really concentrated in the northern part.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions, any comments? Costa?
Can I continue with my questions?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, okay. I have two questions. One question is about the European law for the destruction of the fishing boat. What is the situation in Spain? If you know, when was the last time that this destruction of boats, with subsidized destruction of boats, was when was the last time that was applied in Spain? And here in Greece, we have the problem that this kind of distraction is still in a possibility in the program of fishing industry. Is it the same in Spain, I suppose? Do you think that the authorities in Spain, they are more sensitive about the not to open this kind of subsidized distraction of fishing, or they might do it in the next years?
Oh, plain and clear, no. I hope it was like that, but I think the situation in Spain is a bit different, because although the economies of Greece and Spain had a lot of common links in the 80s, when Spain was accepted in the European Union, it was with the exchange of its main economy. I think you all know that, and I think Greece is following more or less the same path towards tourism as a main income. The second income of Spain in the 80s, before going into the European Union, it was naval industry, precisely. And one of the requisites to become a part of the European Union was to destroy this industry, basically to disassemble. And it was during that time that most of the fisher ships were destroyed. So I don't think it's the case nowadays. There are not being mass destructions because there are not a lot of boats left, and the ones that there are, well, they are being abandoned or being taken care of in private initiatives. For example, a couple of months ago, we were offered three kind of typical boats from the Mediterranean, from Cartagena, from where we are, because their owners died and no one had the money or the interest to take care of them. But they are not interested in destroying them anymore because there are a lot of them, but there is no also interest in preserving them. We are trying to raise that among the authorities, but so far, at least some of them know now what Shipwright is, but that is our achievement so far right now.
Okay, the next question is about Albaola and the school there. Do you think the school of Albaola is prepared enough young people to work in the boatyards in Spain? I mean, do you think the graduated people from Albaola are enough for the rest of the boatyards and the places in Spain to work in wooden boats, or there is still a need for young apprentices in the boatyards?
Well, as a historian, I'm far to be able to estimate the knowledge of someone in a craft, because I think a person working 6 months there will have a wider knowledge than I by far. It's not my area of expertise. But that said, Albaola is focusing on its main purpose is in historical point of view, from the heritage point of view. For what they explained to me and what I have seen, they really give this heritage formation to the people studying there. And I think they are enough prepared to start working in Shipwright after it. But as I say, I'm not really a person who can judge that. I know that they work there at least for 3 years. They have like kind of a remaining of a guild contract. The students are given the education in exchange of 1 day of work for the shipyard, for example. They have a 3 years formation from the apprentices to the master, more or less kind of education. So I think they have enough information. But as I said, I'm a historian. I cannot really judge a Shipwright.
Sorry, my question was focused in another thing. The number of people that they graduate from Albaola. Do you think that there are enough number of people to work, or there is still a need for young people to go to the boatyards and to work?
The problem here, I think, it's more than the society is not based only in quantities, but also on qualities. So maybe there are enough students in Albaola to fill the positions in all Spain. Maybe, I don't think it's enough, but maybe. but they also have to know the owners of these shipyards, and they have to have an open position. And these kind of links that are more qualitative than quantitative, they are completely lost. There are not really efficient networks of that. So even if there were enough students, they are not fulfilling the positions right now, because the shipyards, they don't know about these students most of the times, and the students simply don't focus to work in Spain because of the things that I already specified, that it is not economically or socially a good way of working, although in some cases there is, but we can say it's not the general status. I don't know if I answered now your question.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions for Alberto? Okay, if there's nothing else, I would like to thank you, Alberto, again for this seminar and the very, very interesting presentation that you had. Again, like I think presenting the continuity and the history of this craft is something very important for humanity, because as you mentioned, like people needed boats from very early on, and these people were quite important for moving societies around the world and expanding, and basically civilization was built quite a lot on boats, and the boat builders built that in a sense. So it was very interesting to hear all that. Alberto's talk is going to be available on YouTube together with all of the previous seminars. I'm going to actually put the link of the YouTube channel over here, where you can find this seminar and all of the previous seminars. Just give me a second. And our next seminar is going to be most probably on the 27th of February. And then we're going to have another seminar very close in March, on the 2nd of March. But as I said, you can watch this one, or you can share the link with anyone who was interested but missed the seminar. And thank you very much again, Alberto, for this work, and congratulations also for the PhD and the publication that you had.
Thank you very much, Katerina, and all the people attending, of course.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining.